All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our analysis and prediction for the 2023 AAC Championship game between Tulane and SMU. Green Wave, 5.5-point favorites. 48 is the total. 4 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC from Yulman Stadium in New Orleans. Looking at this SMU offense, Preston Stone is having a phenomenal year in Rhett Lashley's system, leading this high-flying attack, 42 points per game. Stone has 3,200 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Another 4 rushing score. 60% completion rate certainly isn't the greatest. But this offense has been great this year, especially in conference play. They ran it up on Navy, 59 points. Tulsa, they hung 69 on them. They've really just been demolishing opponents so far in this conference on this side of the ball. They scored 11 against Oklahoma, 17 against TCU. Both were road games. Those are the only 2 losses this year for SMU. They've been flawless nonetheless. Those Big 12 teams have the edge there. What do you make of this offense so far, Nick? Do you think it's a fluke? Do you think they're being disrespectful running up opponents? Because obviously that's going to give them a lot of praise when you look at these numbers. But going up against a legit defense now could certainly cause maybe a little bit of embarrassment if they have a bit of a fluke game here.
Flawless in conference play is pretty exciting if you're an SMU fan. This offense in the past has been a dynamite under Sonny Dykes and coaches of that sort of elm. Now they kind of transferred to a new era. You wondered what the offense would look like after Tanner Mordecai left and transferred out of the program, and now you kind of step up and you have your new coach in the system. Preston Stone running this air raid offense. I think Stone has looked fantastic. Completion percentage is a little disappointing, right? If you want to nitpick, you could say that at 60%. Roughly 60%, 3,100 yards and 28 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. You can nitpick a little bit if you want to, but overall, I think this air raid system is still working just fine for this team. Like you said, they have run the score up against some of the weaker opponents. I don't know if it was necessary to score 69 points against Tulsa or 55 against Temple and a 55-0 beatdown in Philadelphia. They ran the score up against North Texas, 45. 59 this past weekend against Navy. That was a pretty easy cover when you're looking at that one against the Naval Academy. Now they play a Tulane defense, like you said, that is a very solid defense. Overall, this offense is good, 41.8 points per game, 4.50 yards per rushing attempt, which is solid considering it's an air raid offense. Yards per play is averaging 6.55, so solid numbers overall. 31 touchdowns to 6 interceptions passing. This is a solid passing attack in an air raid scheme that's doing their job.
Yeah, you look at the weapons. They don't really have that one standout, but they have 6 different guys over 20-plus receptions. 5 of those weapons have 400-plus yards. None of them have over 500, though, so this is the definition of spreading the wealth. R.J. Maryland, that tight end, leads the way with 462 yards, 7 touchdowns. Jake Bailey has, not yet found pay dirt, but he has 450 yards. Romello Brinson, another 417. And then Jordan Hudson, he's probably the most talented of this bunch. He also has 7 touchdowns. 403 yards. Then Moochie Dixon's probably been the most explosive player for them at 19 yards per reception. And you talk about that run game, Jalen Knighton, he followed Rhett Lashley over from Miami, 645 and 6 touchdowns this year. LJ Johnson hasn't been fully healthy. He didn't play against Navy, so you certainly want to watch, for his availability after 2 straight 100-yard games. Shamar Wheaton, this is a former high-end prospect as well. He's been getting, a handful of carries the last 3 weeks. So this is a deep backfield as well. This is a very nice supporting cast, Nick. It doesn't worry you, though, they don't have that one elite standout, or do you think it's just fine that they're being able to spread the ball this much and have success?
It was a little concerning in the preseason. You kind of lack, like you said, that one star. I thought that could be an issue, but it hasn't really affected SMU thus far this season. We keep saying the 2 losses were against Big 12 teams, so a step up in caliber of opponent there. So they've been able to handle their opponent at the G5 level and below. So I think it's been fine for them. They spread the wealth out there. I think it's good. R.J. Maryland, 462 yards receiving, 15.9, and 7 scores for him. He's your leading guy there in terms of your yards and yards per catch in the touchdowns. Jake Bailey's a good intermediate guy with 450 yards receiving, no touchdowns for him. Romello Brinson, Jordan Hudson, Gavante Dixon are all very solid pieces. Keonshawn Smith as well. Dixon has 4 touchdowns, 19.1 yards per grab. So they do have a really nice balance all over the field, which I think is kind of makes it not really that big of an issue. They also are able to run the ball with Jalen Knighton and LJ Johnson. That 2 of them together are 1,100 yards rushing this season and 9 touchdowns. Plus Kamar Wheaton has 5 scores on the ground and 400 yards rushing. So I think the balance is perfect. Like I said, they have a decent number at 4.5 yards per carry on the ground per attempt. I'm happy with this offense overall. I think they're lacking the superstar has not really hurt them.
Yeah, this offensive line is one of the better ones in the country, just with their ability to pass protect. No one really here seems to be a liability. Marcus Bryant didn't play against Navy. Not sure what's going on with him. It's hard to really find, injury reports for some of these teams. The left tackle spot's been just fine. PJ Williams, whenever he's had to play at that spot, has been good. At left guard, Logan Parr's probably their best player. The interior only gets better. Branson Hickman at center. And in the right guard spot, Ben Sparks hasn't been the greatest pass blocker, but he's been a really good run blocker, I would say, for this football team. And then Hiron White, also been quite sound in pass protection. So a very good SMU offensive line. And, that leads you to a Tulane offense. Michael Pratt, a veteran, he's looking for a bounce back effort here in what, presumes to be his final home game. 21 touchdowns, 4 picks, over 2,100 yards passing this year. 9 for 22. That's a 41% completion percentage. Didn't turn the ball over. Had 2 touchdowns against UTSA. And Pratt's always kind of struggled with consistency in terms of high end completion percentage. This is a player that's been very good during this winning streak, Nick. He's been great for this program. Last year, obviously, he did big things. He had 5 interceptions, had over 3,000 yards. This is a guy that protects the football. He's a more than willing runner, 300-plus yards rushing, 4 touchdowns. Obviously, in college this year, you've seen a lot of rushing quarterbacks, really preserve their legs throughout the year. 6'3", 220. This is a great leader. The dual threat prowess here at home. This is a tough quarterback to bet against.
If you're a team in the group of 5 level, you can't get a better quarterback than Michael Pratt, a great leader to have in front of your home crowd, a guy who's been around for this team, and it's just a fantastic leader as a senior, maybe even getting some potential late round draft buzz potentially in the coming future here. I think he's a very talented dual threat quarterback with a good head on his shoulders, 66% completion percentage, really solid, 2,100 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, 4 picks, really good at protecting the ball, which I think is the big key here, is he doesn't create turnovers for himself. He's locked in and focused in that regard. Himself on the ground is great as well, which really does help out this offense to have that sort of dual threat ability when you need it out of Pratt, with a 321 yards on the ground and 4 scores, 3.6 yards per carry for him. Pratt, a great leader. If he's fully functioning, this offense is high flying. He's a really solid quarterback to have.
He has some nice weapons as well, and obviously you want to monitor some of these guys. Jaquan Jackson, Lawrence Keys, and no health is a bit of an issue for them. But if they all 3 get to go, this is a great trio for this conference. Chris Brazel, freshman's really stepped up this year, 675 touchdowns, team high 41 receptions as well. Keys, 599, 7 touchdowns. He's probably one of their most explosive weapons. And Jaquan Jackson, another senior. These guys have played many years together, 24 grabs for over 400 yards and 4 scores of his own. And even Yulkeith Brown is a player that'll probably have to step up if Jackson and Keys are a bit banged up. I believe he was the Texas A&M transfer. And then they have a nice tight end that has 5 scores, and Alex Bauman. What do you make of this receiving core, Nick? Because it seems when they're fully healthy, they're really tough to slow down. And, some of these guys are questionable. I don't remember what happened with Jackson. I know Keys did not play, though, with a foot injury. I'm pretty sure they're hopeful to have these guys back, though, and if they are, it's a big plus here.
If they get all 3 back, that's a huge plus. These are 3 very talented receivers. Between them, I like the numbers out of them. Brazel is fantastic, 670, 16.3, 5 scores for him. Lawrence Keys, 600 yards receiving, 18.2 yards per grab, and 7 scores for him. Jackson as well, 24 grabs, 421, 17.5, and 4 scores for him. Alex Bauman as well has 237 and 5 touchdowns for him. He's a solid piece that they have in this offense. They can get him involved at tight end, the sophomore tight end, big physical tight end. This is a very nice offense. I like what they can do. They spread the ball out, 27.9 points per game. They're very efficient in passing, about 6 yards per play, 24 touchdowns to 6 interception ratio. Solid numbers from this passing attack.
It does appear as if Lawrence Keys will not be playing. Looking at the run game, though, Mekhi Hughes has really stepped up. It's going to be a by-committee approach this year as Tajay Spears departed, and they certainly don't have that same explosiveness, at least from, a week-to-week standpoint. But they really showcased it against UTSA. He ended up exploding for a season-high 166 yards, 6.3 yards per carry. That's the second highest mark this year for him, against a pretty solid run defense. 1,246 yards, 7 touchdowns for the freshman. He's been great, especially as a power runner, 5'11", 205. That's about it. It's him and Michael Pratt. They're going to carry the load. Clayton Johnson, he's a little banged up. Doesn't appear as he, got the go this past week. So they certainly don't have many guys to lean on, especially with their second back missing the last 3 weeks. So it's really going to be up to these two, Nick. Do you think that, Pratt and Hughes can carry the load?
I think Pratt and Hughes can carry the load. Replacing Tajay Spears, who got a lot of buzz at the start of the draft cycle last year, was a fantastic player for that Tulane offense. Was tough to replace him, but Mekhi Hughes has been fantastic. 1,246 yards on the ground, 5.4 yards per carry, 7 scores. We talked about Pratt. Clayton Johnson is a good number 2 back. You can use him in third down situations when he is fully healthy. A solid back, though. 142 and 4.2 yards per carries for him. It's disappointing to have a guy like Keys that's not going to play. That is certainly a loss for this offense, but overall, this is an offense that is efficient on the ground. The points per game is a little lower than I thought that they were going to have this year at 27.9, but overall, this is an efficient offense with a good offensive line and overall a solid unit that puts up points when they have to, and they get the job done.
Yeah, and look at the offensive line; they're also just as sound. I think them and SMU probably have the top two, units in the conference. Sincere Hainsworth, that is at center. He's been great all year long. The LSU transfer Cameron Wire, he's been a pretty reliable pass blocker out there at his left tackle spot. Shady Chandre Hurst, that is at left guard, hasn't been as polished. I think Josh Remich at right guard's also been a little bit better. So they've been great, and they don't allow many sacks or pressure. So this offensive line, Rashad Green at right tackle, they've certainly held up their end of the load. Look at this SMU defense. This is a unit that's really showcased massive improvements this year. Starts with the defensive line. They're holding opponents to 17.7 points per game. They were pretty sound against TCU, only 34 there, only 28 to Oklahoma. Those games were back in September, of course, but that's pretty impressive. Nobody else throughout the year was really able to hold those units in check, especially the Sooners. This D-line, though, it's really clicking. Some veterans here in Elijah Roberts, Elijah Chapman. These guys have been around a long time. They've gotten better every single year. Nelson Paul, another senior. Cameron Robertson has stepped up alongside them. And you got more veterans in Jordan Miller and Corey Robinson on the interior. This is a defensive line that I'm very happy with. They've been productive. For the most part, they've slowed down the run. They held Navy to under 200 rushing yards, and they haven't allowed an opponent to eclipse 200 at all this season. And they held Oklahoma and TCU both to under 195 rushing, even though they certainly were pushing that mark. But in conference play, they've certainly been very dynamic, 3.2 yards per attempt, 10 rushing touchdowns allowed. I think that's less than what Georgia's even allowed this year. So very sound stuff here from SMU. The Mustangs have a nice unit, 40 sacks this year. Very happy with what they've been able to do on this side of the ball.
Very solid front defensive unit for the Mustangs here. I really do like what I've seen. They're a big physical unit that gets and stops the run, 3.27 yards per attempt on the ground. Like you said, 17.7 points given up per game is the average, 4.5 yards per total play. Giving up 10 touchdowns on the ground. They're a pretty physical, solid unit. Elijah Chapman, 30 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Corey Robertson, 25, 4.5, and 2.5 for him. Jordan Miller, 24, 4 tackles for loss, 5 or half a sack for him. Nelson Paul, 21, 5.5 and 3, and then Cam Robertson, 17 total tackles, but nice production for him, 5.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. That front defensive part of this unit is a very physical part of this unit. They get after the quarterback. I like the sack production. They're solid in this 3-4 scheme.
Yeah, and these linebackers and Kobe Wilson, Ahmad Walker, they've been terrific this year. Top 2 tacklers. They've been stout against the run. Very polished part of this defense. They really got them clicking on this side of the ball. And then you look at the pass defense. This is also a unit that's really impressed tremendously. It's been strong all year. They certainly haven't been perfect. They gave up 400-plus yards to Memphis and, a 4-point win there. Obviously, they weren't tested much against Navy. When they played Oklahoma and TCU, they allowed a combined 7 touchdowns with no interceptions. So they're still able to hold them in check. Gabriel was held to only $176 passing, and they haven't been tested all that much in conference play. Rice, I know JT Daniels was kind of beat up for that game, so they played a few different quarterbacks. North Texas, they have a nice passing attack. They're able to hold in check for the most part. So I think this is a secondary that certainly has proved themselves. And even though Lawrence Keys will be out, they certainly have to prove their muscle here against a team that's been very effective at, sparking big plays, at least in the past. Big-time yard per attempt numbers usually from Pratt. Isaiah Nwakabaya at safety, he's great. Kale Sanders, he's a versatile player for them at corner. Charles Woods has been great. Jalen Davis Robinson. This has been an incredibly healthy unit this year. Jonathan McGill is probably one of those guys that you don't want to, or one of those guys that Tulane will probably try to target. Ahmad Moses as well. He's been great as a tackler and playing in the box at his safety spot. So they have a lot of different guys at all 3 levels they've been throwing all around, Nick. What's the expectation here, though?
I think this is a solid unit. It's facing against a good Tulane passing attack. I like what they have at linebacker. Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker, the top 2 tacklers. Wilson, 63, 2.5 tackles for loss. Ahmad Walker, 53, 6.5 tackles for loss, and a sack for him, plus 4 pass breakups. I think there are some solid players. Jonathan McGill, 46 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 7 pass breakups. Ahmad Moses, a good heavy hitter, 43 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack for him. Kilgore as well is a solid player, 31 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Overall, this is a solid unit that produces good production. Like I said, they don't get beat a whole lot downfield. 10 interceptions to 16 touchdowns given up, 4.5 yards per play given up. This is a solid defense that's facing a tough challenge here in this Tulane offense, but I think they have a good shot to match up well against these guys.
Glancing at the Green Wave defense, they have a highly impressive front of their own that's loaded with some veterans. Patrick Jenkins, Devon Deal stepped up this year of 11 TFL. Keith Cooper Jr., 8.5 of his own. Darius Hodges, one of those veterans that's been great for this program. Cameron Hamilton. I mean, they have a nice, solid rotation, of their own. I think this is a Tulane defense that plays very physical football, and this is really a staple of their program, where they're even better against the run. Only 10 touchdowns of their own, 2.9 yards per attempt allowed, just north of 1,000 yards this season. They've been flat out dominant in some of these games against, common opponents. Ole Miss, for example, not a common opponent. They held them to 89 yards on 35 attempts. The most they've allowed this year was 177 to UTSA, and the bulk of that came off a big run. The Barnes ripped off in the first half. UAB found their way to 170. That's it, Nick. Only 3 contests this year of 100-plus yards. That's very impressive. Again, considering you played Ole Miss, you played South Alabama, who has a good rushing attack. This is some phenomenal football that Tulane's playing up front. It starts with some of these physical down linemen they have up front that are tone setters for Tulane.
It certainly is a big physical tone-setting unit that has some solid players. Devon Deal, 36 total tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Patrick Jenkins, 31 total tackles, another 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks for him. Keith Cooper, 26 total tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks for him. Darius Hodges, 23 total tackles, 8.5, 7.5 for him. Cameron Hamilton, 20 total tackles, 6 and 4 for him as well. Eric Hicks, 23 total tackles, 2 fumble recoveries for him. This is a very physical front part of this defense that is a really good hard-hitting unit. Like you said, they don't get beat too badly against the run. The 4-2-5 is really working for this team. The front 4 they have has been very physical and dominant and kind of relieves the pressure on these linebackers who are also very talented and lead the team in tackles.
Yeah, Tyler Grubbs, a New Orleans kid, transferred in from LA Tech, and he's been very productive. Not as productive as he was over there for the Bulldogs, but this is a guy that plays complementary football, allowing his other players around him to flow. Grubbs is great. Jared Small's having a good year. Jesus Machado, he's really stepped up, came out of nowhere for this program. He's been an elite run defender, very sound, surefire tackler. These front sevens are as good as it gets in this conference, Nick. It's no shock they're playing against each other in this contest, and you're going against a tough offense. And, Tulane just played a really good offense, and they completely stifled them. Obviously gave up a little bit on the ground, but overall, Frank Harris had a headache all day, limited them to only 16 points in the game. I thought that they were going to be able to win due to a secondary that certainly has had its struggles, middle part of the year. They were giving up a lot of yards through the air, gave up, 355 to Tulsa. But over the last month, they really tightened up. And that game against Frank Harris was dominant, forcing 3 interceptions, including one on the first drive. They gave them an easy touchdown, 5.1 yards per attempt. That's the lowest they've held an opponent to all year long. Secondary seems to be playing its best football at the right time. It was just a couple weeks ago where Tulsa had a bit of their way with them. But that's really an outlier, I would say, since, the mid part of October. They have great players. Cam Badiscola at safety is a really good football player. Jarius Monroe is an elite player that had a big-time game against Harris and the Road Runners. Lance Robinson's a veteran corner himself. This is a good secondary, Nick. I definitely think they have nice talent, and, certainly their passing yards per game allowed number 242. It's one of the higher marks in the nation, almost 3,000 yards allowed. But again, this is a sound unit that has been able to snag 15 interceptions this year. DJ Douglas has 3 of his own, another player you can throw in there. This is a very well-coached unit, and I think they're pretty complete at all 3 levels.
Very well coached back end of this defense. The 2 linebackers, Machado and Grubbs, are really good physical players. 92 total tackles for Machado, leading the team entirely. Grubbs 62 as well, 6.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Good numbers of the 2 linebackers. The secondary, I like the production. Bailey Despian, 58 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and a pick, 2 pass breakups for him. DJ Douglas, 3 picks, 2 pass breakups, 47 total tackles. Jarius Moore, 45 total tackles, 2 picks, 8 pass breakups. Cam Perdelix as well, 11 pass breakups, 45 total tackles. Great numbers from him. Lance Robinson, 4 picks, 7 pass breakups, 37 total tackles. Like I said, was a star against the Road Runners this past weekend. This is a good defense. They're giving up 18.3 points per game. I like that number. That's a solid number. Yards per play is a little higher. You'd like to keep it below 5, but the rushing attempts is where it really gets highlighted. 2.95 yards per attempt on the ground. Just incredible numbers. 15 interceptions, 15 touchdowns ratio. This is a very stingy Tulane defense playing in front of a home crowd that's going to be very loud as they look to win the conference title.
Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. Preston Stone having a great year. I'm going to give Pratt the edge, especially here in this home crowd environment. Running back, I think SMU is incredibly deep. Makai Hughes is really just going to be the bell cow for them the rest of the way. Wide receiver, Lawrence Keys is out, and there's been a lot of nice production from SMU. So it's kind of shocking that I would give the edge to the Green Wave. I just think that Brezel is great. If Jaquan Jackson plays, it's going to be good there. I like their tight end production. If Jackson doesn't play, then SMU is going to get a clear edge there, I would say. But some of the big play making prowess guys they can lean on gives them the edge. Offensive line really even. I think I'm going to give a slight edge to SMU. I think they're a little bit stouter on the interior. Defensive line, I mean, again, another spot where you could probably be even, but I like what SMU's been able to, Tulane rather has been able to accomplish over the last 2 years. Well, the Mustangs have really gotten into in just this year. Linebacking cores, they're both very sound. I think it's a little bit deeper for the Green Wave as well. And then the secondary, I'll give SMU the edges because they've really proven that, even though, Ball Hawks, they have 10 interceptions this year of their own. Tulane coming off a great game against UTSA, and they have 15 picks. I could really just call it even all across the board outside of maybe the running back position, Nick. What do you think?
I think you can call it even on the board outside of running back. I think this is a very fair, very balanced teams. I think running back does go to SMU pretty comfortably. Wide receiver, you might want to give it to the Ponies as well, just because they do have that good balance. The offensive line, complete toss-up, secondary toss-up as well. I think Pratt does get the clear edge at quarterback. That's one where I feel pretty confident about. But these are very two even-matched teams battling out for a conference title. These teams, the class of the American for a reason, and now they have a great opportunity to battle against each other.
The final thoughts on the prediction. Keys to the game for Tulane. They've won 10 of the last 11 in conference play at home. Feed off the energy. Get Pratt back on track, and the defensive line plays to the level they're accustomed to. For SMU, you want to move fast. Keep the Green Wave guessing and be physical versus a run game. These teams played late last year. It was a complete beatdown. 59-24 victory in favor of the Green Wave here at home. And Tulane's a team I seem to pick against a lot for some reason, especially at home, and they seem to prove me wrong every single time. There's no hate intended at all. I just look at some certain matchups I think that could be taken advantage of, and guess what? The opponent cannot take advantage of them, Nick. That's exactly what happens. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I feel very confident after a brutal effort against Frank Harris, a guy playing possibly in his last college game, that passing attack completely blanketed them. They could do nothing at all. This Tulane defense is legit, and this just seems like a game, where Tulane could blow this one out of the water. Good offenses sometimes come into games after a hot season, play a good defense, and it's a brick wall. And I think that's kind of what happened to the Roadrunners last week. I think that could happen to SMU here, but I like their defense, so I'm going to keep them in this game 30-24. We really don't know what to expect, Nick, because, SMU's obviously been dominant, but this is a completely different animal than when they played, some Big 12 opposition earlier that I think Tulane could probably compete with. They didn't look very good. It was back in September, granted. I'm going to stick with 30-24 score here in Tulane. Finally going to back them. I'll go ahead and cover them to take that line that's all over the place.
I'm going to take SMU here. I feel confident in the Ponies to get this job done. Tulane has a lot to look forward here. If they win this game, they're most likely going to be the Group of 5 representative in the New Year's Six Bowl, which, some people feel that's not deserved. Other people feel that is rightly deserved for this Tulane team. I like the Ponies here, though. This offense has been scoring a ton of points. Yes, the opposition has not been great, but the numbers that they have been putting up are fantastic. I really think it's impressive when they put up, 59 against Navy, 45 against North Texas, 69 against Tulsa. Those are impressive numbers for me. I know this Tulane team hung in there with Ole Miss and was beating Ole Miss at one point, which is definitely the toughest opponent these two teams have faced. SMU didn't look great at times against Oklahoma, but I'm going to take the Ponies here. I think they have a great way they can move fast. If they can keep Tulane unbalanced and off their feet, cut down on turnovers, be physical, they have a great shot to win this game on the road and upset Tulane.
Yeah, it seems like the over will probably be in play at 48 there. Could also be a trap, though, with two great defenses. It's probably more likely going to be a defensive game. Though it's going to be a good one to watch, Nick. Probably take a little stab at Tulane, but nothing too major. That's be it for today's episode. I appreciate you joining me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this great matchup in the Group of 5.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.